the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luhr. I'm excited to have a fellow sports marketing veteran with me on the line here today, calling in from Hong Kong, Mr. Patrick Murphy. Welcome to the podcast, Patrick.
Marcus, lovely to speak to you. Great pleasure to be on the podcast. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun hour here. We're going to dig really deep, not just in the amazing things you've done in your career already, which spans almost 30 years, but of course we're going to spend a good time on what you're doing right now. And let me just quickly give everyone a background on yourself who might not know you, which won't be many. But you spent basically the first 10 years of your career in the world of television, ITV, Fox, ESPN, just to name a few. Then you spent a good 12 years with team marketing, which obviously promotes and markets the Champions League rights, UEFA Champions League right in Europe. And we're going to definitely touch on that and how that relates to what you're doing now. Then you went a bit on your own into your own agency world with Catalyst and Synergy. Again, certain folks would recognize Catalyst, of course, as the International Champions Cup owner. We're going to have some fun there. And now you are the CEO of FMA, or the long form is that for Football Marketing Asia, or others might still recognize it as DWMC Fortis. So we're going to work ourselves toward that last part, but we'd always start off really how it started at the beginning. And so I would sort of say, how does a kid from Dublin take over Asian football? But how do you really got into the world of sports first, or into, I guess, media initially with ITV and then others? Please start there.
Yeah, I mean, it started off after school selling junk mail advertising door to door in Dublin. After I finished school, myself and a couple of friends set up a company with this concept that was new at the time. This is back in 1984, 85, right, called junk mail, which one of our older brothers brought back the concept from the States.
Okay.
And I set up my first company. I think I was 18 or 19, going door to door in Dublin, selling this junk mail opportunities, and then printing up all this junk mail material and delivering it to households around Dublin, and selling that advertising, which was a fantastic experience, because really it taught me how to sell and how to do it on a door-to-door basis, which is the most difficult selling that there is. I quickly learned that my friends, most of my friends were having a wonderful time in college, enjoying 5 months off every summer and going to the States, working in bars and stuff like that, and that seemed a much more attractive life. So I quickly went back to college, if you like, or went to college and studied marketing in Dublin, which was also a wonderful experience. I was very fortunate while I was at college to also be able to work for Guinness's, the famous Irish beer brand. Right. They had what they called a college representative in each of the universities, and I was the rep in Dublin, and it meant that I was able to get my first introduction to the sponsorship business, because basically my job was to go and sponsor different sports and entertainment fraternities in the university. And of course, I was very popular because I had all this free Guinness to give out. But in all seriousness, it was great, because it gave me my first taste of being a promoter, which is really what I always really enjoyed doing, is promoting events and putting on events, big events. The bigger the better, and that was really where I started.
I love this. What a great story. And it's actually, I recently posted something on LinkedIn about how many millionaires or billionaires have started their first job in sales. And you sort of, just talked about it. Sales is such an amazing space to obviously start and learn the real world very quickly. I love that as an awesome start. Now, let's talk a bit about your first decade in the world of television, and maybe we'll skip a bit over ITV, and sort of just jump a bit into your Asian part here, right? So you spent several years. You came pretty much to Hong Kong there in the sort of early '90s. I think '93 here, what I can see, with Newscorp. How do you get from ITV to Newscorp Hong Kong? How does that work?
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, basically, I was doing commercial work at ITV, firstly at Thames TV in London and then at UTV in Belfast. Basically, commercial work meaning program sales, video sell through, essentially program financing. That I was in that business. And a guy I was working for who had actually hired me at UTV had turned out to be one of the senior executives at Richard Lee's Star TV in Hong Kong.
All right.
It was actually managed by a guy called Julian Mounter, who is a guy who was, British executive. But one of his guys was somebody who I'd worked for at ITV. And I'd fallen in love with Asia just on a personal basis through travels that I'd made out over the previous few years. I wanted to work out there. I wanted to work out here. And basically, when Morris got this job at Star TV, he helped me to also get a job at Star TV, and I was delighted to leave ITV and make this big move into coming out to Asia. And I went out and celebrated heavily, as you do in Ireland, as young Irish guys do. And the next day I went and bought the newspaper, and I opened the newspaper, and in the business section, staring out in front of me was Rupert Murdoch buys Star TV. And I was like, oh my God, I'd literally just signed a contract with these guys. What the hell? So I called the guys in Hong Kong. I said, look, should I still come out? Because obviously things are going to be difficult, I'm sure. And they said, well, it's completely up to you. I mean, you've signed a contract. If you want to come out. So I went out, and to cut a long story short, obviously when a company is taken over, there's a big change in management and change in culture. And I was just very fortunate that because I hadn't really worked at Star TV before, that the news guys sort of took me under their wing when they came in. And I was extremely lucky because I worked under some of the most amazing far-seeing and now kind of famous guys in basically in the TV industry. I worked under them at Star TV in the 90s.
Right. Yeah, very cool. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised that we maybe bumped into each other around that time. I came about a year after you, so I landed there in the later part of '94. And spent a couple of years up in Hong Kong too. And that's obviously also what I said earlier, links to the AFC later, because the company I was working for had the rights at that time. So who knows, maybe we ended up in some bar together and we just don't remember that anymore. So.
There's probably a few things we don't remember about that time, actually. The 90s in Asia were fun.
Yeah, that's right.
But, the thing that was incredible about it was that obviously sport was really important to Murdoch. It was really movies and sport. They were the two drivers for pay TV. Right. And when he came out and his executives came out, and I'm talking about people like Sam Chisholm and of course Gary Davey, who ran Star for many years. They basically looked at the environment, or actually, very luckily for me, they asked me to look at the environment, and I did a big study of the environment in Asia. And basically what we saw was that there was no or very little regulation. It was basically possible for a media owner to not just have a broadcasting business, but also to own clubs, to invest in federations, to basically create their events. Yeah. And these guys were coming from highly regulated environments in the UK, Australia, and the States. So very, very quickly they said, okay, we got to put a big sports policy together. The sports policy needs to involve, of course, our broadcast channels, and they changed over time from Prime Sports to Star Sports, and then, of course, became ESPN and Fox later on. Yeah. But we also need to invest in creating and acquiring our own events, and so we should set up a company that basically does that. And that's the company that Gary Davey asked me to set up, and that was Sports Corporation. Which was basically what I was focused on working for 6 or 7 years in Asia.
Yeah, and I know many of the colleagues and guys you work with, Tim Holland and others, of course, over the years there. But before we jump further, let's give our listeners a sense of the type of events you guys were running, because guys were doing everything from the Asian X Games, right, taking over the X Games. Mark, I guess, from the US, bring it in, and at that time it was already ESPN-Star Sports, so you can see that. You were involved, of course, in football, with from Tiger Fives to Standard Chartered marathons, and you name it. I mean, what was this? Was there a strategy, or just grab everything and let's see what works?
No, there was definitely a strategy. I mean, the first, and it was very much coming from the broadcast point of view, right? So basically, the channels were acquiring the big international content like Wimbledon and Formula One, and they didn't need us to help them in that respect at all, okay? Yep. There was also then, which I don't think was very well known. I'm sure you know about it, but there was also a relationship between ourselves and Asia Sport, and there was actually a significant investment in Asia Sport made around that time.
Okay.
And certainly there was a supply of the regional football that was coming through the Asia Sport Group, through Seamus, and also the basketball, and of course the Asian Golf Tour. Okay, so the regional local sports were essentially provided for through that relationship. Okay, right. So really what we needed to focus on, or what was missing, was to focus on certain markets where news wasn't particularly strong, and also where there weren't necessarily a lot of content coming from. And of course, at the beginning of Murdoch's relationship with Star TV, China was incredibly important. So a lot of our early work was actually focused on Greater China, and then India became very important, which is why we went into cricket. And then of course Southeast Asia was the other piece. So that's why we did a lot of the events there. But really, what it was to, as I say, the mandate was to acquire events, but more importantly to create and to develop our own IP wherever we possibly could.
It was some fun times there.
Yeah, certainly.
It definitely was. Now, interesting enough, then you sort of almost did a complete reversal here, pretty much right after this. I would say skipping a bit over one more other role you had in between there, but you then landed not so much back, but you landed in Switzerland with Team. Again, big significant move, of course, for yourself, working with one of the premier companies there, and clearly one of the biggest sports properties on the planet. And you spent a good, almost 12 years there. So let's dig into this a bit quickly. How do you get from Hong Kong back to Switzerland all of a sudden, or back to Europe?
Well, I think in the interim, I'd got married to a girl from Hong Kong. We'd had a child. My daughter Joyce was born in Singapore in 1999. I think we both felt that we wanted to take a break from Asia, actually, to raise our daughter and our subsequently our other child. And so we wanted to go. So we didn't really know where we were going to go. We actually were considering to go to Australia, but I did apply for some jobs in Europe. And then very fortunately, as it turned out, I managed to get a job at Team Marketing. And Team was a really incredible experience for me in terms of my career and my life. It was a very, very, very different experience to anything that I'd been involved in before, because I kind of went from Asia, where things were, things moved quickly, where, we were working a lot of different markets. I was working for an organization like News, which was highly entrepreneurial. Things were changing, pretty much by the month, into Team. And Team is a very, very, those who know it, that it's a very, very structured, a very well-managed organization, and so I would say that I learned an enormous amount working with Team Marketing, especially in the first few years,
Yeah, I mean, you came in as a director of sponsorship sales, and by the time you left, you not just were a member of the board, but also you were the managing director of sales. So again, your whole career there, or those 12 years, were in sales, and I'm assuming it was both media rights and of course initially sponsorship. Let's talk a bit about that. I mean, because it was also we're now in the early 2000s here, right, where clearly pay TV globally was exploding across the world, and that was all fueling the drive and these huge new dollars coming in there, and so it was a fun time. I've had Phil Lyons and others on the call before, who also went through those periods, of course, and partially we were all maybe lucky, and similar to TSA as an own agency, that what was happening around the world, and we were able to take advantage of it. So how do you what was your role there? And, talk a bit about some of the more fun stories of some of the big deals you guys did, because we're talking billions here, So you're familiar with the B word there, and we'll get to that later when we talk about the money you guys are, putting up here now.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting. There's a few interesting things there in what you just said. I mean, the first one is the billion, right? That was something that I had never really understood or experienced in the context of sports marketing before. Coming from Asia, coming from Sports Corporation, We were doing some very big deals, but they were always in the kind of hundreds of thousands, maybe $1 million, maybe a few million for a big sponsorship deal.
Yep.
If things got really wild and crazy, the rights fees for the cricket in India might go up to 10 million, something like that. And all of a sudden I found myself in Switzerland sitting on a project which was, literally, it was certainly over $1 billion. At that stage, subsequently it's gone up to multiple billions per annum.
Right.
That was a shock. It was definitely a shock. I mean, it was a kind of a nice shock, but it was a shock. The other thing that was interesting that you mentioned was, again, the sales thing. The thing that we started off at the beginning of our conversation. Team was an incredibly successful organization. And an incredibly successful sports marketing agency. But what was really amazing about that particular time that I joined was that there were very few salespeople in the organization. And the reason for that was because the founders, Jürgen Lenz and Klaus Hempel, were, kind of famous sales guys. And they had, with the management team immediately underneath, had really built this incredible property throughout the 90s off the back of primarily the evolution from public television to commercial television, right? That was the first move, and that was very much the 90s. And then, as you say, there was a big escalation at the beginning of the noughties with paid television. But for various reasons to do with the organization, there weren't that many sales guys. So when I joined, I kind of found myself in a fortunate position that I was one of the few salespeople in the organization, and I was able to kind of jump in and really get stuck in. Now, the other thing was, of course, that the Champions League sponsorship program was so strong, fundamentally so strong, and of course so well managed by Team and UEFA that Team generally renewed. They generally renewed with their sponsors, and they didn't actually have to add that many new sponsors. And you may recall there was even an occasion where they went from having 8 sponsors down to 4. There was this famous moment where they had this less is more concept. And as a result of that, they actually were, if you like, almost getting rid of sponsors, right? So
that doesn't happen very often.
That doesn't happen very often. So I joined after that when Team had to look a little bit forward into the future. And I had an amazing mentor there, a guy called Tom Liston, who's still a very good friend of mine, and Tom taught me an awful lot, and I worked very hard for Tom, and together I think we did some really wonderful work in sponsorship in the early noughties, and then I was extremely fortunate to be given an opportunity to move from sponsorship sales into media sales within Team, which I did, I think, in around 2005. And again, had an opportunity to work with Simon Thomas, who is again one of my huge influence on my career, and a wonderful guy. And Simon and I worked extremely closely together for the next 5 or 6 years, selling the media rights.
Now at that time had UEFA already invested in Team and took a stake, or was that after? I can't remember exactly when that all happened.
Yeah, I mean, I joined at a kind of a juncture in the UEFA Team relationship. Up until the time roughly that I had joined, you could say UEFA might have been more like a traditional federation or confederation, and Team essentially acted as their as the person as the entity that ran all the commercial side of things. Right. When around the time that I joined, UEFA was looking to sort of change that relationship and make it more one where, UEFA was the entity that decided the strategy and the structure of how things were done, and that Team would then come in, of course, help them with that strategy, that commercial strategy, but would really execute it. Yeah. And of course, this is quite an important change in the kind of relationship between the two entities. So yes, when I joined, I joined in the middle of a tender process where Team had to actually reapply, if you like, for its mandate. Okay. I think a lot of people at Team thought that I was kind of crazy joining months before that had been clarified. But it turned out that Team won the mandate, of course. But the relationship between UEFA and Team, did change quite a bit in those years, and UEFA took a much firmer view of their role in the relationship, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. And it's interesting, we'll maybe come back to a bit later. Clearly, I have no doubt that what you're doing now with FMA, you'll be leaning heavily on some of the experience with team and figuring out how to replicate that, I'm sure. But before we get there, we got one last piece to cover here. And that's, of course, then, the years you spent here, really the last, I guess, 7 or 8 years here now. Somewhat also as an entrepreneur, you set up Catalyst and Synergy, very different organizations. Catalyst, again, I mentioned earlier, is the International Champions Cup promoter or marketing agency there, and I'd definitely love to hear a bit about that because it's well known. It's a great tournament, a concept, I think, globally. I'm not sure where. I believe it. Nothing happened obviously this year, but there's a lot of things happening over those years, and there was Synergy we're doing some interesting stuff in South America. So let's get into the ICC, which is the other ICC outside of the cricket world here. How did that idea come about? Because obviously these club tournaments and these pre-season or post-season tours have been around forever, but you guys are really took it to a whole nother level there.
Yeah, well, they say success has many fathers and failure has none, something like that. So I definitely wouldn't want to in any way claim that the International Champions Cup was my idea. In fact, it was an idea that emerged in the States between Stephen Ross, who's the American real estate billionaire, and Charlie Stilitano, who is somebody who's worked in the American football business for 25, 30 years and is well known to many, many people in the industry. I mean, the concept for making the summer preseason period into a meaningful, interesting, entertaining platform was something that was really put together by Steve and Charlie, with, of course, help from people like Matt Higgins and other people at RC and Relevance in New York. Where I got involved in it was that I had finished up with team and I had taken a little bit of time off. I had decided that I wanted to go back to Asia. A lot of it was for personal reasons. My kids were half Chinese, but they'd never spent a lot of time in Asia. We thought it'd be a good thing to come back. Obviously, a lot of opportunity lay here as well in terms of the growth in the advertising markets and the media markets. So we saw this as a really good place to come back and start a business. Mm-hmm. My first preference was that my first idea was actually to get quite involved in local Asian football, and we'll come back to that later on. But this opportunity came along through an introduction by a good friend and colleague of mine, Arnie Rees. We started talking about working together on this International Champions Cup program. And at the time, the ICC had, I think, 1 or 2 seasons in the States. Yes. Basically, Steve's big idea, and it was it sounds like an obvious idea, but it was actually quite a simple but beautiful idea. And that was, instead of having the major international European clubs playing against local American sides when they came over in the summer, yep. Why not have them play against each other? I mean, it's a very simple idea, but nobody had really thought about it. And of course, Steve had the financial resources to be able to make that happen. And he had Charlie Stilitano, who had the relationship with the European clubs and also the organizational ability to deliver the matches in the States. So they had done a year or two. It had gone well, but they wanted to build it up further. We met. My experience, again, going back a little bit to the team times, was my experience was really around, again, what were the things that team and the UEFA Champions League were really famous for? Number one, creating a great brand, and great brand marks. Number two, actually centralization, the concept of centralizing rights as against having rights decentralized. Traditionally clubs had played on a decentralized basis. They'd all organize their own matches. They'd play with this guy today, this guy tomorrow, this promoter over here, that promoter over there. Yep. And so my experience was really, in how the centralization of commercial rights added value. 2 + 2 = 5, not 4, right? Mm-hmm. And so they were interested in that experience. And then, of course, very importantly, was the media platform and the fact that, the real opportunity in premium football, the real commercial opportunity is in building a media platform, generating rights fees from broadcast, and doing that in a kind of a considered way. So basically, we sat down, we talked about these ideas, and we agreed to work together. And Steve and Matt Higgins helped me to set up Catalyst, actually, and they became a shareholder in Catalyst. And we agreed that I would help them in two respects. The first was in building that international media platform, and the second was very importantly expanding the International Champions Cup into Asia. Okay, because one of the things that they were facing was that, Real Madrid might be very happy to come and play for Charlie in New York and Los Angeles in 2014, but in 2015, they wanted to go to Asia.
Correct.
Yeah. So basically, I was able to offer them the ability to organize on the ground in Asia, but in parallel with building the media platform.
That made total sense. And obviously you did several big events or tournaments in China. Now it's Singapore has the rights. I'm not sure whether they still have it at this moment in time. Are you still involved in it, or you've kind of now moved on since you are obviously heavily associated now with FMA?
Yeah, no, I'm not involved in it. One of the things we can talk a little bit later when it comes to the AFC project is that, I need to, and I want to, and I'm happy to work exclusively on that project. So that means that other business areas I'm not involved in. But yeah, no, I mean, we organized matches in Australia, actually. We had some... That's right. 100,000 plus attendances at the stadium in Melbourne, which was absolutely exhilarating. We organised multiple matches across different stadiums in China. Again, very, very exciting. And yes, we did enter an agreement with the Singaporean government to stage the ICC in Singapore. Obviously, this year has been a strange year for everybody. Yeah. So I suspect that they've just taken a pause for this year, and that they'll be back next year is what I expect.
Yeah, awesome. Now, well, and I think anyone now where we're finally getting into the sort of meat of Football Asia, football marketing Asia here, I think everyone can figure out why you're doing what you're doing, and why again you found these partners in China to back you and believe in what you can do here. So, but before we go into this, I want to make sure that our listeners, especially from around the world who are not as familiar as you and I are with AFC and Asian football, let's give them a sense of the scale of this thing here, right? Now, I'll throw a few numbers out, and then as I said, we'll you add to it. First of all, we're obviously talking about a very large region, pretty much starting up in Japan, going all the way to Australia and the Middle East, right? That's Asian football. 50 plus federations are part of it. I believe it's the largest in the world in terms of combined federation power. We have, as I said, the Asian Cup, which is the UEFA, the Euro of Asia. As part of your program, which is unique because you have both the national teams and then, of course, you have the club competition, which here in Asia is called the AFC Champions League, and then there's also another cup below that. So we're dealing in a very large region. What is it? Close to 4 billion people probably. Very diverse. As I said, the northern Asian markets are very different than the South Asian, than the Indian subcontinent, and of course the Middle East. So massive diversity, as much as you can find anywhere on the planet. And there is an amazing history there. But before we get there, so how do you guys look at Asia really? And I know in your deal, as far as I recall, is the Middle East isn't part of it, but you still, at the end of the day, the tournaments and everything you guys are running, of course, across this massive continent here. Yeah.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that obviously at a personal level, I'm extremely passionate about Asia. I've spent, a good chunk of my adult life here. And as I say, my wife's from here. My kids are half Chinese. So I'm very, very passionate about the region, and I always really have been. And of course, the rights themselves are rights that I have been very familiar with. And, for all the time that I've spent out here, we talked about it earlier on in the discussion. I'm very, very, very familiar with them. It was really a project that I always wanted to have an opportunity to work on. But the rights were, they were tied up with Asia Sports, which became World Sports Group, obviously, very, very tightly. And there was never an opportunity which became Lagardère, yeah, of course. There was never really an opportunity for me to be involved. And really what happened was, I think the rumors started emerging in the market. I can't remember exactly when, but it probably was sometime in early 2017 or 16 even, that the AFC were going to run a tender process to see if they would continue with Lagardère or if they were going to enter a new agency relationship. And of course, the minute that became clear, my ears pricked up, and I started thinking about how I could get involved in that, and with a view to trying to become their new partner.
Right. Yeah, and again, talk us a bit through how you then went about it, because I read a bit about it, of course, already. And maybe also introduce your partners a bit. Who is DDMC? DDMC, right? The Chinese sports agency. They're a public listed company in China, so again, maybe anyone from China would know them better, but the rest of the world probably doesn't know as much about them. Maybe explain a bit about these guys.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy to do so. I mean, first of all, I think I felt confident. First of all, I recognized that it was a very complex project. There's no question about that. If you look at the scale of the footprint, and if you look at the scope of the projects, you mentioned it before, all of the club competitions, all of the national team competitions, running from basically Lebanon right across to Guam and Mongolia down to Australia. I mean, it's just a huge project. But we felt, and I when I say we, I'm talking about myself and my management team, my partners. I mean, we felt that if anybody had a chance to do it, and I mean this in a as modest way as I possibly can, if anybody had a chance to do it, it was us, and that was because we had the experience from team. We understood not just about selling media rights and selling sponsorship and developing commercial concepts and brands and all those things, but also very, very importantly, we understood about how you deliver those rights, those matches, on a continental basis. One of the things that team was absolutely incredible at, I think most people would say agree, industry leading at, was the commercial delivery at matches, at venues. And team were used to running hundreds of matches every year, and our staff were used to doing that, and we had all sorts of incredible concepts like dual roles, where people might work as an account management for some of the time, but then would also go out and work with venues. So we had myself and my management team had a lot of experience in the execution of rights too, and that was something, and that is something that's extremely particular to this project. So we felt like we knew how to handle the commercial side, but we also had the experience at delivering the competitions. Obviously, we'd also run matches in China and stuff like that. And across Asia, so we had experience of that. So I think we felt that we had the experience to deliver it as a management team, and that we were able to put together a very strong agency. And I think we also felt that there were some ingredients that we were able to bring from the team UEFA relationship, the structural relationship that could be very appealing to the AFC. And that might be somewhat unique to our offer. Right. And those included things like, a desire, willingness, offer to work with the AFC on an exclusive basis. In other words, not to be an agency that had other things and that were thinking about other businesses and other properties, because I think that's something that's really, not always, but often has had quite a negative impact for the rights holders. And as I say, I think there's a lot of admiration at the AFC, and rightly so, for UEFA and for the way UEFA conducts itself and conducts its commercial programs. And obviously, myself and my management team had been part of that a lot, you know.
Yep.
So
I can see your pitch right there. It's an easy one to see. Absolutely.
So that was part of it. So I think that was one part of the pitch. Our experience and our willingness to bring that model, adapt that model, but to bring that model to the AFC. Yeah. But you know, the second part, and of course this is incredibly important, was the money, right?
Yes.
And the ability and the ability to bring, you know, not just guarantees, financial guarantees and etc., but also knowledge and understanding of probably the most important market in Asia commercially, looking forward to the next 10 and 20 years, and that's China. You know, it became very clear to me, and I don't think I'm unique in this, and I certainly wouldn't claim to have any unique insights here, but clearly China is going to be an incredibly important market for football in general, and for the AFC in particular, for the next 10 to 20 years. So I knew that the solution had to be more than just, you know, my expertise of my team, the UEFA team model or elements of it. It had to also encompass China.
Yep. And the money.
And the money. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think I've already gone on record somewhere saying that I believe, and I'm not sure I put a number to it, but in the next 20 years that China could be the single largest football market in the world, meaning also having potentially the biggest football league. To me, why would the Premier League continue dominating it if China really takes it serious and puts the money behind it? Everyone will be playing football there. That's my belief, but that's a different story. Now, a bit more about DDMC.
Yes, sorry, I'll go back to answer your question.
No, that's all good. They're public listed, and obviously they did several other deals. They acquired a company which had the Premier League rights, I believe, right, for some substantial money. They also have a couple other, I think, UEFA rights with the Nations Cup, Nations League. So they were in the space, right? They didn't just sort of stumble upon you guys and then went into this here. So, but what is their real remit? What were they doing before the partnership with you?
Okay, so DDMC Wuhan is a publicly listed company in Shanghai. It's on the Shanghai stock market, and all the details about the company are available there. It essentially has two main sides to the business. One is entertainment, the other is sports. Okay. On the entertainment side, it produces a lot of scripted content in China, primarily for China. So they're TV series and movies, and that's very successful. They've actually got, I think, 4 or 5 very successful TV shows at the moment in China, and things are going extremely well there. Obviously, scripted content, we could talk about this some other time, but is obviously going through a huge boom at the moment, not just in China, but globally. Yes. So they're very successful in that area. And then the second area is in sports. And in sports, obviously that's the area where I work closely with them. But in sports, their primary vehicle now was an acquisition of a company called Super Sports. Right. And Super Sports is a Chinese media and sponsorship agency run by a gentleman called Mr. Yu. Mr. Yu is very well known in the business, especially in China. And yes, Super Sports was the agency that managed the Premier League rights for 2 terms recently, and more laterally now is the partner for La Liga in China. Okay. It's a strategic partner for La Liga in China, and also manages the Euro for UEFA in China. So basically a company that has expertise in acquiring international content, packaging it for the local Chinese market, distributing it to other Chinese media companies, whether it's TV companies or digital companies, but also publishes itself. It has actually a joint venture with iQIYI, which is the leading, well, they call it the Netflix in China. Yeah. So Super Sports has a joint venture that covers a sports digital platform in China. So essentially, if you like, we have our own platform in China, which is of course very, very useful, very important. So Super Sports is the core entity, the sports entity, if you like, within the DDMC Wuhan family. And then the relationship between ourselves and DDMC Wuhan, how that came about was I essentially approached these people when it became clear that the AFC were going to run a tender process, and invited them into a partnership. And, I think they could definitely see that there was a great opportunity because, obviously football is incredibly powerful in Asia. It's also very powerful in China. So they saw that this was something that could be very, very powerful for them on a domestic basis, but would also give them an opportunity to also expand on an international basis. And I think, what also featured very heavily in our conversation was looking at how some other Chinese companies had approached international expansion, and how some of them, not all of them, but some of them had stumbled.
Yep.
Sometimes stumbled very badly. And we discussed that maybe there was a better way to try and tackle the international market, and that rather than acquiring an international agency for a very large amount of money and having management run essentially as soon as they could, to perhaps look at a different way, which was bidding for a big international property, but one that had a lot of appeal in China and in markets that were on the immediately outside China, and to bid heavily for it so that you won. That was definitely something that would have to be part of the plan. But that effectively over the course of 8 or 10 years would give you much greater value than, as I say, going out and acquiring an international agency where, you might lose value and balance sheet value very quickly.
Yep.
And I think that's very much proven to be the case.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and we all know you're referring to our friends from Wonder Group, Wonder Sports, of course, and Infront and all the things they bought, and even Le TV, which kind of went a different route, just acquiring large rights within China, and all that obviously went pear-shaped. So it's your model is different. The proof is still in the pudding, which we'll come to in a minute. Of how successful, of course, you guys will be. That you have a tremendous platform, which has huge opportunities for the next 8 years, as your rights are starting to kick off next year. There's no doubt about it, and it's an exciting time to be. And so that's where I really want to spend sort of our last maybe 15 minutes so on a bit. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I have a little bit of a history. When I first came to Hong Kong, working for the group who at that time had acquired the rights for the very first time ever. They had done a deal with the AFC, and at least what I remember, the number was around $20 million for the 4-year cycle. So let's say $5 million a year, which was a lot of money at that time. We're talking 1993 here. Where at that time no one had given a penny basically to Asian football. So Seamus took a big risk there, but he was well rewarded obviously over the years then, and even though it had different names attached to it down the line, but that agency and it has the rights still till today, and that's the one obviously you are superseding there. Now the numbers which are now being thrown around, and again I'll quote certain things I've read in various industry magazines and papers, is on the lower end of scheme of things about 2.4 billion for the 8 years which you acquired. There's some numbers which are even bigger, which maybe let's start with at least the smallest number out there, and that still makes it 300 million a year over the 8 years. Up from 5. That's a huge jump, but at the same time, that's over 30 years. So it depends on, I guess, how we look at it. Is tremendous growth in whichever way we want to look at it. But obviously, you guys believe there is more to it. There's more to come. And also, I think the 2.4 is usual for what I've seen in previous deals. I actually saw the contract of the one before, which was about 700 million. Billion. We're getting the B's already mixed up here. It was about 700 million in minimum guarantee at that time, but it was all the production was on top. So again, even the last contract for the 8 years prior to this year, which is currently still running, was all close to $1 billion probably by the time you're all done with the whole cost of running the show there. So there is a large other cost to it, and I'm certain your deal would be probably structured in a similar fashion. What's the plan? I mean, first of all, please comment on any of the numbers if you like, but I know you guys been obviously careful what you say there. But also, how are you planning to recover or make that money back?
Yeah. Okay. Well, look. Obviously, you'll understand if I can't comment on the structure of the relationship with the AFC because it's confidential.
Absolutely.
So I can't get into commenting on the numbers or anything like that. Yeah. I mean, look, we did bid aggressively. We bid aggressively because we knew that in order to win these rights, we would have to bid aggressively, and the tender process was very competitive. Every major, I think without exception, every major international agency participated in the tender process without any exceptions, I think.
For sure.
We did win by a clear margin. I think that's well known.
Yes.
And we bid to win. I've been involved. We skipped over some of the other stuff that I did, for example, working in Latin America for a couple of years, but I was involved in some tender processes there, which I didn't win. And it became very clear that if you want to win the rights, you need to pay a premium. We call it the strategic premium, right?
Right. Okay.
But the rationale for paying the premium, I guess, is tied back a little bit to what I mentioned earlier on about a bigger picture, wider plan, longer view, alternative way to access the international industry. So there were actually very good reasons for paying that premium. But the premium was paid. I would accept that. What the premium is, I can't comment on.
No, that's fair enough.
But having put all of that aside, I mean, what we've been doing now since we won the tender process, and we've been working very intensively with the AFC for the last 2 years, is on delivering the things that we saw, delivering on the opportunities that we saw. And you mentioned some of them earlier on, but they are quite unique in our industry now. I think it's important to point that out. I mean, number one, the term of the relationship is 8 years, which is effectively a double commercial term.
Yes.
It's not usual, or it's not common that you have those double terms available to agencies like us. Quite often they're single terms, and quite often the terms are, say, 3 years rather than 4. So the fact that we can work on this project for 8 years for 2 commercial terms is worth paying a premium for. Okay. The second thing is that the package of rights does contain both the national team rights and the club rights.
Yep.
And basically, again, that's unusual. UEFA separate these rights out. CONMEBOL would separate these rights out. So that was also a very important thing that's worth paying a premium for. A very big part of it is a real belief and confidence in the region. The fact of the matter is that we have a vast region, and we've got multiple vast regions within the region, right? We have China, which is just the most incredible opportunity, I think, over the next 10 and 20 years. We've got some very solid, mature markets like Korea and Japan. May not experience wild growth, but are very solid in terms of the money that they generate, and they generate significant monies. Australia, you'd probably put in a similar basket. We've then got India. India is a market where football, is way behind cricket, but it's still the second biggest sport, and still has, I think a decent 5-10% share of the market. Let's put it like that. But it's a huge market. We've got the Middle East. One of the fastest growing populations in the world is in the Middle East. We've got markets like Saudi Arabia, who are obviously now looking to really grow internationally, and so I mean, I could go on and on. We haven't even touched on Indonesia and Thailand, places like that. Correct. So the opportunities within the region, I think, is what probably we believe in most, in conjunction with the fact that this is football, this is a double term, this is national cup. We believe that it's worth paying a premium.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we still believe that.
And having been around this world, and again, obviously you've done a lot of stuff in football as well over the years, football is the number one sport in the general sense, with these sort of exception. We already touched on cricket in India and basketball in the Philippines or whatever. But so I have no doubt, and I see what you're seeing there as well. At the same time, and this is sort of where we're now getting into this, the world has changed dramatically, and not just because of COVID, but even you, I think, made some comments already in some other publications that the media landscape is dramatically changing. It is, again, another era of digitalization now, and that I think is bringing pain to the industry, and nothing to do with you with your deal directly, but it's just in general, right? TV rights are shrinking. We see it even in home markets, right? The Premier League is making less money in the UK now. And that's where when I look at your deal with the premium you're paying, and then you have these dynamics on the other side, right? Where it isn't growing necessarily right now, it is going backwards. How do you guys look at this? I mean, does that kind of, do you sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with a bit of sweat on your forehead, or are you fairly relaxed about that?
Yeah. Well, anyone who tells you that running a project like the project that I'm extremely privileged to be running doesn't wake up sweating regularly, would be completely lying. But it isn't always necessarily to do with whether Facebook are going to come into the market or Amazon. It's not necessarily to do with that. A lot of it's to do with actually other issues like delivery issues and stuff like that. But to go back to your core point, I mean, look, I think there's a few things. Again, where did we really see the opportunity with these rights? What was, what are the core things? And then the question is, have those things really changed, right? Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that amazed me, and I mentioned this when I talked about leaving team and starting my own business in Asia and what I was originally interested in doing. I was originally interested in working in Asian local football because I'd seen the ratings. And I'd seen the prices that are being paid for the content. Right. And of course I knew what, and so have you. And I of course also saw the ratings of my own content, inverted commas, Champions League. And I also knew how much I was being paid for that. And, to be quite honest, these things were totally out of sync. They're totally out of sync. Correct. The value... Correct. The ratings that something like the Indonesian league gets in Indonesia or a Malaysian league, the ratings that intention that this content generates in the local markets is way, way, way bigger than the amount of money that it's generating. Right. Okay. So from a very, very simple point of view, that's where we saw the opportunity, and we actually continue to see the opportunity. It really comes down to two things, Marcus. One, local content. Local content. Anyone who's in the film or scripted entertainment business will tell you that local content always outdoes international content. That doesn't mean people don't want to see Star Wars and, Hollywood content, but local scripted content is much better. And in sports, it's not dissimilar. Of course, they want to see Manchester United in the Champions League, but they also want to see their own stuff, right? So for us, the opportunity was really in around essentially trying to build as much as we could using decentralization, using branding, using more progressive commercial concepts and lots of other things, but essentially delivering a much better local product for the media partners. And the second thing was value. The reality of the situation is that people like the Premier League, Champions League, my great ex-colleagues at Team and Josh Smith at Premier League and these people who I've worked with over the years, I mean, the prices that they are asking for and generating are obviously very, very high. And that hasn't always been the case in terms of what was being generated with local content, right? So for us, it's around going to the media companies and providing a really compelling offering, which is, look, if you want ratings and you want it in time zones that are good for you and featuring local heroes, pay a bit more, and it's still a lot less than what you're paying for the internet. And so far, to be honest, that message has actually resonated very well. I'm glad to say. And so I think that our core approach has worked quite well. Now, the point you make about how the media market is evolving is a different one. And yes, I mean, of course, I would completely accept that things are definitely evolving. There's no question about that. Does it mean that free-to-air, the MNCs of the world or the media primas of the world are trashed? No, it doesn't. I think that that's not the case. Does it mean that their income is down from where it was before? Yes, I think that is definitely the case. Does that mean that they have more challenges in terms of affordability? Yes, I do believe that. But then what should they do? Should they buy great local content at an affordable price, or should they load it into really expensive international content, which comes in the middle of the night and which is 5 times the price? And you know what I mean? Yeah. So I actually see some of the stuff that's happening in the media market as a really great opportunity for us not just a challenge. I'm not.
So good.
I'm not a denier, right? I'm not trying to deny the fact that things are clearly changing, and also that we don't really know what direction they're going in.
That's right. Yeah, and you know, in my 20 over years here, probably half the time we were selling international rights into Asia, so we're pitching this at the global IP, and then you know the other 10 we've probably done a lot of local stuff. You know, we've been involved in Asian badminton and table tennis and so on, and yeah, these are very different conversations, and we've been trying to convince or educate the market in a similar way of what you're saying, is that the local content should be is many times more relevant and or has better ratings, but doesn't get the value, right? And that is, which you talked about earlier. And I think that's still an interesting journey, and I would definitely wish you best of luck with it there. So because that's at the end of the day what you guys are riding on now. We can't really stop this discussion without going a bit into digital and and what you guys are doing. Are you building your own OTT platform? Are you purely just looking at selling it off and then someone else will run this, or what are your plans maybe in that space?
Yeah, I mean, essentially what we're looking for before even really thinking about OTT, I think what we're fundamentally looking at is, number one, what's the relationship between AFC, its competitions and the fans, you know, and how is that content best balanced, distributed, shared, managed, windowed, in order to try and create the best possible audiences and have audiences that are satisfied. So, we look at it from the point of view, what's the right way to essentially package the content. And the reality is that packaging needs to take into consideration, primarily, or at the center of it, a broadcast partner who's prepared to pay, a broadcast partner who wants to show the content almost certainly on not just on traditional television, but also wants to show it on mobile and internet, and who wants to be able to offer content to its viewers in that way. But then we need a complementary service, which is the AFC owned services, which is their internet services, their mobile services, which we're managing with them cooperatively. And then also you have other stakeholders like the clubs and the members associations who also have a need and a right to have access to some content as well. So basically what we need to do, and what we've been doing, is creating a very balanced approach to that. And that's what we've done in our commercial concept. And we're now very far down the line in terms of actually marketing that commercial concept to the broadcasters, where we've done most of the deals already. So that balance, I think we've managed to achieve very well in this first cycle.
Oh, fantastic. And how about sponsorship? What's happening in that world? Again, sponsors always pull back in these kind of crises. How do you see what do you see happening here? Do you see coming in?
Yeah, I have a few things. I mean, first of all, what's really interesting is that our project, something like the Champions League, it's probably a 90-10 revenue split between sponsorship and media, right? So media is massively dominant when it comes to something like the Champions League. I think the Premier League even more so, right? Whereas for us, we see the balance not necessarily being 50-50, but not as severe as 90-10, right? So what that means is sponsorship is very important for a revenue stream. Number two, the advertising markets are definitely one of the most important parts of our, if you like, model for the next 10 years and hopefully beyond that. Right. And of course, the advertising markets are growing pretty much in every country in Asia, at a really, really impressive pace. Okay. Yes. The advertisers are also looking for this local content that I was talking about before. They're looking for touch points inside Asia. As I say, I've a lot of experience marketing the international clubs in Asia through things like the Champions League and also the International Champions Cup. But the things that sponsors always ask for is, we want to be able to do this on a regular basis in our home territories. We want to be able to, touch these products. Yes. And of course, you can't do that with international football in Asia. So, again, I think we've got something really interesting to offer the market. Now, the other thing is that we're very fortunate that we're able to take advantage of some changes in technology around virtual signage, and we're going to be doing that with our sponsor program. We are doing that with our sponsor program, and what that means is that we're able to crack or at least start to crack what I'm sure, Marcus, you know, is one of the great challenges around the AFC program traditionally, and that is that its greatest strength is traditionally has been somewhat of a weakness in the sense that it's been a project that's been available to people right across Asia, but you only have one set of advertising boards,
yes,
and they traditionally have been acquired by Japanese sponsors, right? So
yep.
You're not able to customize and localize the sponsorship program as much as you could. Now, given the developments in virtual advertising, we're going to be able to do that, and that has allowed us to effectively monetize revenue streams from the big parts of Asia, Japan, obviously China being one, the Southeast Asia and the West. And so that has allowed us to just effectively have more inventory to sell and
awesome.
be able to generate a lot more money.
That's fantastic. And actually, I was going to ask that question, but you already answered it. So that's great to hear. And I'm happy to hear that you go in that route, because that makes complete sense. And that is something I would have asked as well. Now, as a wrap up here, because I'm conscious of time here.
Sure.
We have the Qatar World Cup coming up, 2022, which of course is in Asia, even though it's in the Middle East, but it's part of the AFC. So the first one in the Middle East, but the second one in the AFC region. That's a big one, and it will help you guys, of course. Really putting Asian football on the map. Then you have the Asian Cup in 2023 in China, which again, first time China hosting such a major football tournament, and I'm sure will be the prelude of them one day hosting the World Cup. What's the big plan there? How are you guys going to leverage all this and really make sure that the whole world knows Asian football is here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just in very broad terms, certainly the advertising community are very aware of the fact that football, particularly international football, is a great platform for them to start investing in, with a view to creating an association for the next 10 years, right? For the very reasons you mentioned. The World Cup is coming, and that'll be followed very quickly by the Asian Cup in China in 2023. By the way, it wasn't guaranteed that China would host that tournament when the tender took place, right? So for us, this Asian Cup in China, effectively, you could say is somewhat of our home market. This was really a bonus. Yeah, it was really a bonus for us, and I think that we're going to be able to monetize that for the AFC better than anybody else could. But of course, yes, that is going to China. It's no secret that China has expressed its hope and its intention to win further major international tournaments. You mentioned the World Cup, but there's also a lot of very exciting developments in the West. I think Saudi Arabia is really interested in staging major events in the future, other parts of Middle East too. So I think everywhere you look in the region, things are good. Even Australia, right? The Women's World Cup is going to go there. So there's a huge interest in women's football. So, lots of very positive things for us to look forward to over the course of the two terms.
Well, even ASEAN has put up their hands saying we want to host the World Cup, right? So who knows? I think will be trying to compete with China, which I'm not sure that's such a smart move. But there is a huge appetite. Football is huge. We touched on it earlier in our region here, and I think that's a great way to sort of, wrap this up. I mean, as I said, you are in a very sweet spot. You have incredible rights there for many years to go. The current crisis is what it is. I think there is nothing we can do. None of us can do anything about it. There were some sort of stories about maybe some renegotiations of terms, and the AFC might have made some comments that, everyone is kind of relooking at things. Any of that, you can comment on any of this, or where is it where you guys are just focused on now, getting to and getting, taking over the operation, which starts January 1st, 2021, or when is it the actual first day of operation, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, the first matches will be the club competitions, which are scheduled at the moment to start in February. So yes, we've got delivery just over the horizon, and yes, we are very, very focused on that. One of the things that I'm really proudest of, if I could say, is just the fact that we've built, I think, an incredible agency team up here in Hong Kong. We've got more than 70 people working for us full time at the moment, and that we're also building an incredible network of suppliers and subcontractors. And actually, that's the thing that I'm, probably proudest of most, because at the end of the day, this is 100% a people business, and 100% based success is 100% based on those people performing well. And it's no mean feat to transfer a project like this from one agency to another. That's a very, very difficult thing. I'd also like to pay great respect to Tom Smith at Lagardère. He's been absolutely brilliant. Lagardère have been really, really good. Sport 5, I should say now. Yeah. But those guys have been absolutely very, very professional, I would say. That's awesome. So we're very, 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 very happy about that too. And of course, our colleagues at the AFC who are wonderful. Some of them ex-colleagues of yours as well. We're very much enjoying working with Connie, but also Andrew Rogers, who we worked together with a team, of course. And the relationships are really good, and I think we're definitely ready to kick this thing off in early next year.
Looking forward to it, and hopefully we'll have a follow-up call on this year, maybe somewhere next year once it kicks off and your first sort of events are up and running, and check back in with you. And like you already said, Tom was an old colleague of mine in the AFC days when we first sat there in Hong Kong. He's been around that long, and I'm sure he'll be feeling some pain giving up that baby. And of course, Connie, who spent 20 years with us in TSA, hopefully will be there on the other side of the AFC side for you, helping you out there as well. So it's a small community here in Asia, that's for sure. I had a really good 1 hour here, Patrick. I really enjoyed listening to you and hearing your thoughts and of course your amazing career. So I wish you best of luck with everything, especially there in Hong Kong. And I'm sure our paths will cross somewhere here very soon again.
Thank you, Marcus. It's been a pleasure.
Definitely. Cheers.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Lure podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Lure. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.